On the morning of the 17th of October 2018, a woman known to the regulars of Zurich's Café Odeon as Helena Schmidt was engaged in her typical, meticulously ordered routine. She sat at her usual small table in the corner, a position she favored for its excellent light and its relative insulation from the establishment's ambient chatter, affording her a view of both the entrance and the wide windows overlooking the limit quay. Before her lay a porcelain cup of lapsang souchong, its smoky aroma mingling with the scent of old books and rain-dampened wool coats, a laptop with a brushed aluminum finish, and a stack of printed manuscripts bound by a simple clip. To any casual observer, she was the picture of quiet European intellect, a freelance translator, perhaps in her late 30s, with an ascetic focus that seemed almost monastic. Her work involved the painstaking translation of dense financial prospectus documents from Farsi into German, a niche but lucrative field that neatly explained her presence in Switzerland's financial capital. Yet, the reality of her function was infinitely more complex and dangerous, for Helena Schmidt did not truly exist, and the documents she so diligently translated were merely a substrate for a far more critical form of data transfer. The laptop, a custom-built device that appeared to be a standard high-end model, was in fact a highly compartmentalized intelligence tool, its true operating system hidden behind layers of cryptographic and biometric security, and the subtle, almost imperceptible corrections she made to the Farsi text were not grammatical but algorithmic, encoding fragments of intelligence into the document's metadata, which were then transmitted not to a financial client in Frankfurt, but to a Mossad listening post in the Negev desert. Her real name was Miriam Aharoni, and she was the central human processing node of Operation Chimera, a mission to dismantle a global smuggling network not with bombs or commandos, but with the quiet, relentless application of linguistic precision and psychological warfare from a cafe table. The problem that necessitated Miriam's transformation into Helena was a network that intelligence analysts had codenamed Serpent's Tooth. This organization represented a paradigm shift in illicit logistics, a threat that traditional intelligence-gathering methods had proven utterly incapable of countering. Serpent's Tooth did not specialize in a single commodity like narcotics or weapons. Instead, it operated as a clandestine, full-service logistics provider for a clientele composed exclusively of terrorist organizations, rogue states, and pariah entities. If a group in Yemen needed advanced drone components from a gray market supplier in Eastern Europe, or if a cell in Southeast Asia needed to move funds and personnel to the Sahel without tripping international financial surveillance systems, Serpent's Tooth provided the means. Their operational security was legendary, built upon a foundation of extreme decentralization, absolute reliance on human couriers and face-to-face interactions, and a deep-seated, almost Luddite aversion to modern digital communication. Intercepted signals yielded nothing but noise, as the network's key players communicated through layers of cutouts, using coded phrases in handwritten notes passed in crowded souks or whispered in the back rooms of tea houses. Previous attempts by various agencies to infiltrate the network had ended in catastrophic failure. Prospective assets were either identified and eliminated with brutal efficiency, or were successfully turned into double agents, feeding their handlers a stream of carefully curated disinformation that led to wasted resources and compromised operations. The stakes had been dramatically raised 6 months prior to the initiation of Operation Chimera, when Israeli intelligence received a credible but fragmentary report that Serpent's Tooth had been contracted to transport a new type of military-grade plastic explosive, one whose chemical signature was specifically designed to be undetectable by the latest generation of airport and port-of-entry screening technologies. The intelligence suggested the shipment was destined for a coordinated, multi-city attack in Europe, but its source, route, and timing were complete unknowns. The failure of conventional methods necessitated an unconventional solution, a plan that would attack the network not at its periphery, but at its very core philosophy of trust and discretion. The architect and central node of the Serpent's Tooth network was a man named Rasheed al-Qasimi, a figure who defied every conventional stereotype of a terrorist quartermaster. He was not a grizzled ideologue forged in the crucible of a desert war, but a Damascus-born, London School of Economics-educated logistician who viewed his work with the detached pragmatism of a corporate CEO. Al-Qasimi had recognized, that the greatest vulnerability for modern extremist groups was not a lack of weapons or recruits, but the logistical challenge of moving assets, people, materiel, and money across an increasingly monitored and interconnected world. He built his network on principles learned from studying both multinational corporations and historical espionage rings, creating a system of interlocking, firewalled cells where no single member knew more than was absolutely necessary for their specific function. His true genius, however, lay in his profound understanding of human psychology and his exploitation of trust as a commodity. He recruited not from the ranks of the fanatical, but from disenfranchised and indebted members of diaspora communities, binding them to his organization through a combination of financial reward, familial obligation, and blackmail. Al-Qasimi himself maintained an almost spectral existence. He had no digital footprint, owned no property in his own name, and never stayed in one location for more than a few weeks. His face was known to only a handful of his most trusted lieutenants, and he conducted all critical business through in-person meetings, arranged via a complex system of couriers and pre-arranged signals. He was pathologically paranoid, known to vet new partners for months, even years, subjecting them to a series of intricate tests designed to expose any potential affiliation with a state intelligence agency. His one identifiable weakness, if it could be called that, was a professional obsession with efficiency and security. He was constantly seeking to refine his methods, to find more secure ways to transfer funds and more discreet ways to manage the complex transactions that underpinned his entire operation. It was this very obsession with perfecting his analog system that would ultimately provide the opening for a digital attack vector he could never have anticipated. The audacious solution conceived by Mossad's Metzada department, the unit responsible for special operations, was codenamed Operation Chimera. The plan's central premise was elegantly counterintuitive. Instead of trying to force a way into Al-Qasimi's closed system, they would create a new, ostensibly superior system and entice him to enter it willingly. The core of the operation was the creation of a completely fabricated, high-end boutique firm called Veritas Language Solutions. Based in Zurich, Veritas would present itself as a specialist service for ultra-high net worth individuals and corporations, requiring absolute discretion in the translation and escrow management of sensitive financial and legal documents. Switzerland was chosen for its global reputation for financial privacy and political neutrality, providing the perfect camouflage. The service Veritas would offer was designed to appeal directly to Al-Qasimi's known operational preoccupations. It would promise untraceable, cryptographically secured communication channels, complex multi-jurisdictional fund transfers that blurred the lines between legitimate and illicit economies, and, most importantly, a level of anonymity that even the traditional Hawala system could not guarantee. The plan was to build a digital honeypot so convincing, so secure, and so efficient that it would become an irresistible tool for a logistician like Al-Qasimi, who was constantly battling the inherent inefficiencies of his courier-based network. The obstacles were immense. First, Veritas had to be legally and financially bulletproof, capable of withstanding the intense scrutiny of Swiss banking regulators. This required the creation of a deep and complex corporate backstory, complete with years of fabricated financial records, a board of non-existent but verifiable directors, and a physical office that was nothing more than a registered mail drop. Second, the technology underpinning the service had to be genuinely cutting-edge, providing a level of security that would impress even Al-Qasimi's paranoid sensibilities. Finally, and most critically, they needed a human element, an operator who could embody the persona of the firm's sole, meticulous, and incorruptible proprietor, someone who could manage the interactions with the network's cutouts with flawless linguistic and cultural fluency, building a relationship of trust over months, or even years, from the sterile environment of a laptop screen. The search for this unique operative led Avner Cohen, the case officer assigned to Operation Chimera, to an unlikely candidate, Miriam Aharoni, a tenured professor of comparative linguistics at Tel Aviv University. Miriam was not a field agent. Her only connection to the intelligence world was a deep and unhealed wound. 2 years prior, her younger brother, David, a promising officer in the Shin Bet, had been killed in Jerusalem by a remotely detonated explosive device. The subsequent investigation had revealed that the bomb's sophisticated detonator, a component not manufactured in the region, had been smuggled into the West Bank through a logistical chain that bore all the hallmarks of Serpent's tooth. David's death had shattered Miriam's academic detachment, replacing it with a cold, simmering grief that she channeled into her work with relentless intensity. Avner saw in her not a soldier, but a weapon of a different kind. She possessed a genius-level intellect, fluency in 6 languages including Farsi and multiple Arabic dialects, and a deep academic understanding of the cultural nuances of communication. More importantly, she had the psychological profile of someone capable of immense patience, meticulous attention to detail, and the emotional discipline required for long-term deep-cover work. Her motivation was not patriotism or ideology in the abstract. It was a deeply personal and focused desire for retribution, a powerful engine that Avner believed could be harnessed and directed. Her recruitment was a delicate process, a series of conversations that began as informal discussions about linguistic patterns in intercepted communications and slowly evolved into a direct proposal. He laid out the operational concept, emphasizing that it was a mission of intellect and precision, not of violence. He explained that her unique skills could succeed where traditional methods had failed, offering her a chance not just to avenge her brother, but to dismantle the very organization that had enabled his murder. After a week of solitary deliberation, she accepted, leaving behind her life of academia to enter the clandestine world that had claimed her brother. Miriam's preparation was an exhaustive 18-month process of transformation designed to strip away the academic and build the operative. It was a curriculum devoid of the typical spycraft of firearms and physical combat. Instead, it focused on the far more esoteric arts of psychological warfare, digital tradecraft, and the construction of an impenetrable identity. Her trainers were not commandos, but forensic accountants, cognitive psychologists, and veteran Mossad Katzas who specialized in non-official cover operations. She spent months immersed in the intricacies of Swiss banking law and international financial regulations, learning to navigate the labyrinthine world of shell corporations, bearer bonds, and dark pools of liquidity until she could speak the language of illicit finance as fluently as she spoke Farsi. Her psychological conditioning was particularly intense, involving prolonged stress simulations and sophisticated role-playing scenarios designed to test her ability to maintain her cover under pressure. She was taught to compartmentalize her emotions, to project an aura of detached professionalism, and to detect and counter the subtle psychological probes that a paranoid individual like Al-Qasimi would inevitably use. A significant portion of her training was dedicated to mastering the operational technology developed specifically for the mission, a suite of tools codenamed Project Scribe. The centerpiece was her laptop, a device that was a marvel of clandestine engineering. Its chassis was subtly reinforced, and its internal architecture was bifurcated into 2 completely isolated systems. The Helena partition was a standard, fully functional operating system that could withstand forensic analysis, containing her translation software, correspondence with legitimate clients, and a fabricated personal history. The second, Miriam partition, was an air-gapped, heavily encrypted environment accessible only through a complex sequence involving a specific keystroke cadence, a pressure-sensitive biometric scan of her thumbprint on a designated area of the trackpad, and the proximity of a physical token disguised as a simple silver fountain pen. All communications from this partition were routed through a custom-built steganographic engine that could embed encrypted data packets into the seemingly innocuous file structure of her translation documents, making them invisible to all but the intended recipient. The construction of her cover identity, The Legend of Helena Schmidt, was an exercise in obsessive detail. A team of specialists from Mossad's Mifrats division, responsible for operational logistics, spent over a year building Helena's life from the ground up. They began by manufacturing a history, creating a backstory of a Swiss national born in Geneva to diplomat parents, which conveniently explained her linguistic abilities and her somewhat transient, unrooted nature. They fabricated birth certificates, school records from an international school in Brussels, and a degree in philology from the University of Geneva. To make the legend withstand scrutiny, they engaged in a process they called historical seeding. They created social media profiles for Helena that had been dormant for years, occasionally updated with mundane posts by an automated system. They backdated subscriptions to academic journals and online forums related to linguistics. They opened a Swiss bank account in her name and made small, regular deposits and withdrawals over a 2-year period to create a pattern of normal financial activity. Every detail was considered. The apartment they rented for her in Zurich's Seefeld district was chosen for its anonymity and its respectable address. It was furnished sparsely, reflecting the persona of a woman dedicated to her work above all else. The props that would define her public life were carefully selected. Specific editions of rare books on etymology, a particular brand of Japanese paper for her notes, and the Lapsang Souchong tea she would order every day, a choice distinctive enough to be memorable but not so eccentric as to draw suspicion. The goal was not merely to create a cover story, but to build a complete living identity with its own habits, preferences, and a verifiable, if unremarkable, past. When Miriam finally arrived in Zurich, she was not playing a role. She was inhabiting a meticulously constructed life, a life so detailed that it could, for all intents and purposes, be considered real. Miriam's insertion into Zurich was deliberately uneventful, a slow and patient process of assimilation. For the first 6 months of the operation, she did absolutely nothing related to the primary mission. Her entire focus was on living the life of Helena Schmidt, establishing the patterns and routines that would form her baseline of normalcy. She took on a handful of genuine, low-level translation contracts for legitimate Swiss companies, work that was tedious but essential for building her professional reputation and providing a plausible source of income. She established her presence at the Café Odéon, arriving at the same time each morning, sitting at the same table, and ordering the same tea, becoming a familiar, unremarkable part of the café's daily tapestry. Her interactions were minimal and always professional. She was polite but distant with the staff, and she politely rebuffed any attempts at conversation from other patrons, projecting an aura of focused, intellectual solitude. This period of soaking was a critical phase of the operation, designed to allow her to become part of the city's background noise, a person whose daily presence was so consistent and predictable that it would eventually become invisible to any potential surveillance. During this time, her only contact with her handlers was through the scribe system, sending brief, weekly heartbeat signals, confirming that she was safe and her cover remained intact. These signals were hidden within the metadata of the legitimate translation work she submitted online, a constant test of the covert communication channel. It was a period of profound isolation, a test of the psychological conditioning she had undergone. She was utterly alone, armed only with her legend and the knowledge that a single mistake, a single moment of lapsed concentration, could lead to the complete unraveling of the operation and her own probable death. After 9 months of patient groundwork, the operational phase of Operation Chimera commenced. The website for Veritas Language Solutions went live. It was an understated, professional-looking site, optimized to appear in searches using keywords related to secure financial transactions, offshore banking, and discrete legal services. To seed its reputation, Mossad used a series of front companies and assets to engage Veritas for small, seemingly legitimate contracts. These clients would then post glowing reviews on exclusive, members-only forums frequented by individuals in the worlds of private security, corporate intelligence, and, crucially, the gray economy. The service performed flawlessly. Communications were crisp and professional, transactions were executed with silent efficiency, and the promised layer of cryptographic security was demonstrably robust. The strategy was to build a reputation through word of mouth, in the very circles where Al-Qasimi's network would be listening. The first real bite came 3 months later, from a mid-level arms dealer operating out of Antwerp. He used Veritas to facilitate payment for a shipment of small arms, a transaction that was carefully monitored but not interfered with by the agency. The successful completion of this deal acted as a powerful endorsement. 2 more clients followed, each one a step closer to the target, their business representing a gradual escalation in scale and illegality. Then, 14 months into her deployment, Miriam received an inquiry that set every nerve on edge. The message came through the website's encrypted portal, written in formal, classical Arabic. It was from a cutout, an intermediary who did not name his employer but whose phrasing and specific security questions were a near-perfect match for the psychological profile of Al-Qasimi. This was the moment she had been trained for. Adhering strictly to her operational protocol, Miriam, as Helena, responded with clinical detachment. She was not eager. She was demanding. She outlined her firm's strict protocols, questioned the intermediary's own security measures, and initially refused to even consider a business relationship until her own stringent vetting process was satisfied. This carefully calculated display of professional arrogance and obsessive security was designed to mirror Al-Qasimi's own paranoia, signaling to him that he was dealing with a fellow professional, not a law enforcement trap. The negotiation, conducted over a period of 7 weeks through encrypted text, was a high-stakes chess match, a duel of tradecraft and psychology. Finally, the intermediary signaled his employer's satisfaction. Veritas was engaged for a trial run, the transfer of a relatively small sum of money, just over 50,000 euros, from a bank in Cyprus to an account in Malaysia. The transaction was a test, and Miriam executed it perfectly, providing her unseen client with an untraceable, cryptographically signed record of the transfer. The hook was set. Over the next several months, Serpent's Tooth began to integrate Veritas into its financial operations. The transaction started small but grew steadily in size and complexity as Al-Qasimi's trust in this anonymous, efficient Swiss firm deepened. Miriam became the network's de facto banker and communications hub. She handled payments for safe houses in Germany, transferred funds to procure forged documents in Thailand, and facilitated the complex escrow arrangements for shipments of sensitive materials. Each transaction provided her with a new piece of the puzzle. She meticulously analyzed routing numbers, account holder details, IP address origins, and the linguistic tells in the messages she received. Using the scribe system, she cross-referenced this data with Mossad's existing intelligence, slowly and painstakingly building a detailed, real-time map of the Serpent's Tooth network. She identified key financial nodes, logistics hubs, and the identities of previously unknown mid-level operatives. The psychological strain was immense. She lived a life of dual realities, spending her days in the placid, orderly environment of the Zurich Café, while digitally immersed in the dark underworld of global terrorism. The clinical detachment she had been trained to maintain was her only defense against the crushing weight of her isolation and the constant, low-level fear of discovery. Her handler, Avner, communicated with her only when absolutely necessary, providing updated intelligence and encouragement in messages hidden within the Farsi financial documents he sent her under the guise of a regular client. He reminded her of the mission's objective and of the personal stake she held in its success, reinforcing the cold, vengeful resolve that had set her on this path. She was a ghost in the machine, a silent observer at the heart of the enemy's operations, waiting for the one critical transaction that would justify the activation of the endgame. The signal came on the morning of October 17th, the day the operation would reach its climax. It was a request from Al-Qasimi's primary cutout, larger and more complex than any that had come before. The network was using Veritas to coordinate the final payment and logistical instructions for the shipment of the new, undetectable explosive. The message contained everything: the name of the freight vessel carrying the explosives, its current position in the Mediterranean, the specific container number, the port of entry in Italy, the details of the ground team assigned to receive it, and the routing of the final payment to the supplier in North Africa. It was the entire operational plan, entrusted to the secure system that Al-Qasimi had come to rely on completely. Sitting at her usual table in the Café Odeon, Miriam felt a profound and chilling stillness settle over her. The years of training, the months of waiting, the immense psychological burden it had, all led to this single moment. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced, deliberate speed. She initiated the pre-planned takedown protocol, a sequence of encrypted commands that would compile all the intelligence she had gathered over the past year into a single, comprehensive data package. The package included a complete organizational chart of Serpent's Tooth, from Al-Qasimi down to the low-level couriers, a map of their logistical routes, a list of their financial assets and bank accounts, and the precise, actionable intelligence on the explosive shipment. She embedded this data bomb into the metadata of the Farsi to German translation she had been working on all morning. With a final steadying breath, she attached the file to an email addressed to her regular client in Frankfurt and pressed send. The data burst, lasting less than a second, was routed through a series of proxies before arriving at the Negev listening post. Instantly, Alarms sounded in operations centers across the world. A message was dispatched to the Italian Navy to intercept the freight vessel. Arrest warrants were activated for dozens of individuals in 7 different countries. The synchronized takedown of the Serpent's tooth network had begun, triggered by a single keystroke in a Zurich Café. Miriam's exfiltration protocol was as meticulously planned and unemotional as the rest of the operation. There was no hurried escape. After sending the final transmission, she remained at her table for another 20 minutes, slowly finishing her tea and reviewing the printed manuscript before her, maintaining the illusion of normalcy to the very end. She then packed her laptop into its leather satchel, paid her bill in cash, leaving her customary small tip, and gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod to the barista. She walked out of the Café Odeon and into the cool Zurich air, just as she had every other day. She did not look over her shoulder. She followed a predetermined route that took her away from main roads and into the winding, cobblestoned streets of the Altstadt, a path she had walked mentally 1,000 times. Her first stop was the Rathausbrück, a pedestrian bridge crossing the Limmat River. Pausing in the middle, as if to admire the view, she discreetly unlatched the bottom of her satchel. The custom-built laptop, weighted with a thin sheet of lead sewn into its casing, slid silently out and plunged into the dark, cold water below, taking all of its secrets with it. She continued her walk, her pace unhurried. Her route led her to a large, multi-story department store. She entered with the lunchtime shoppers, took an elevator to the 4th floor, and went into a women's restroom. Inside a designated stall, a small package had been left for her in the sanitary disposal unit. In less than 3 minutes, she transformed. The severe, dark clothing of Helena Schmidt was replaced with the brightly colored jacket and jeans of a tourist. A wig of blonde hair covered her dark brown bob, and a pair of non-prescription glasses altered the shape of her face. She emerged from the department store as a completely different person, melting into the anonymous crowds on the Bahnhofstrasse. At precisely 1:47 p.m., a black sedan with diplomatic license plates pulled up to the curb at a pre-arranged corner. The rear door opened. Miriam got in without a word, and the car pulled smoothly back into traffic, heading for the airport. Helena Schmidt, the quiet translator from the Café Odeon, had ceased to exist. The immediate aftermath of Operation Chimera was a resounding, almost unprecedented success for Israeli intelligence. The Italian Navy's special forces stormed the freight vessel in the Strait of Sicily, seizing over 200 kilograms of the new explosive and apprehending the crew. Simultaneously, coordinated police raids in Germany, Belgium, France, Turkey, and Malaysia resulted in the arrest of 67 individuals connected to the Serpent's tooth network. The financial assets Miriam had identified, totaling over $30 million, were frozen. With its command structure decapitated, its logistics chain shattered, and its finances crippled, the network effectively collapsed within 48 hours. Rasheed al-Qasimi was captured 3 weeks later in a safe house in Istanbul, identified from a grainy photograph provided by a low-level courier who had been one of the 67 arrested. The intelligence community hailed the operation as a masterpiece of modern espionage, a textbook case of how to dismantle a decentralized, analog network using a sophisticated digital honeypot. Yet, for Miriam, there was no sense of victory or triumph. The process of her debriefing back in Israel was clinical and detached. She recounted the operational details with the same precision she had applied to her work, her voice devoid of emotion. The revenge she had sought for her brother's death felt abstract and hollow. The organization was destroyed, but the fundamental realities of the world that had created it remained unchanged. The operation had cost her more than she had anticipated. She had willingly sacrificed her identity as Miriam Aharoni, the academic, but the persona of Helena Schmidt, the one she had inhabited so completely for nearly 2 years, had also been stripped away. She was left in a state of existential limbo, no longer the person she had been, and with no clear identity to assume. The clinical detachment that had been her greatest asset during the mission now felt like a permanent condition, a shield that had become fused to her skin, isolating her from the very world she had fought to protect. She had become a ghost, a living legend within the agency, but a stranger to herself, forever defined by the quiet, monumental act of dismantling an empire from a table in a cafe. What is the true cost of using a person's deepest grief as the primary fuel for an intelligence operation? And can a victory achieved through such profound deception, turning the very concept of trust into a weapon, ever be considered morally clean? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.